It wasn't just the walls of the prison that had secrets. It was the ground beneath them, the air, the very stones that held it all together. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I hadn't been told the full story. The guards, the warden, even the inmates, none of them spoke about it directly, but I had been warned. Don't ask too many questions. And yet, despite all the fear gnawing at me, I couldn't help myself. I had already broken the rules. The creature, the thing that had been following me, was closing in on me with every passing moment. My instincts screamed at me to run, but a part of me wanted to understand what I was dealing with. What had I gotten myself into? I started looking through the old records in the security booth, searching for any information I could find about the prison's past. There had to be something, maybe a clue. Something that explained what was happening to me. My fingers trembled as I sifted through the dusty files and old paperwork. Most of the documents were too old to be of any real use, but one caught my eye. It was a faded article about the prison's history, dated back over 50 years ago. The article talked about the prison's origins. Originally built as a high-security facility for the worst criminals, it had become notorious for housing not just murderers and thieves, but those who were seen as threats to society. Dangerous people whose crimes didn't make sense. People who were violent for no apparent reason. People who, when locked away, still caused chaos from within their cells. But that wasn't what stood out to me. No, what caught my attention was the mention of the incident, a dark chapter in the prison's history. According to the article, the facility had been temporarily shut down after a series of bizarre and terrifying events. The inmates who had been housed there were said to be beyond redemption. Guards, even senior staff, began disappearing without a trace. Whispers spread about strange figures seen in the shadows, figures that didn't belong in the physical world. The inmates, some of whom had been locked away for decades, started claiming they could hear voices from the walls, from deep inside the earth itself. The article was short, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. The prison had been reopened under new ownership, with a fresh set of rules, a tighter grip on the inmates, and a stronger effort to keep things in order. But the eerie silence about what had really happened, that was something no one would talk about. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I remembered something from my first night. The words that Harris had whispered to me. "You're not safe here. None of us are. They're watching. They're waiting." The old article, the disappearances, the strange warnings from the prisoners, it all started to make sense. The prison wasn't just a place to hold criminals. It was a place built to contain something far worse, something that had been trapped here for years. I couldn't help but feel the weight of it, the truth that no one would speak of. The very thing that was terrorizing me was the same thing that had terrorized everyone who would come before me. And it was still here, still waiting. Suddenly, the air in the booth grew colder. The faint scratching noise I had heard earlier returned. This time it was louder. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. Someone, or something, was in the room with me. The room felt too small, too tight. The shadows on the walls seemed to grow longer, stretching and contorting in ways they shouldn't. I looked at the monitor again. Cell 13 was no longer just a cold, dark room. It was alive, shifting in the flickering light. The faint glow I had seen earlier was back, brighter this time. I felt drawn to it, almost against my will. My eyes locked onto the screen. But now, I didn't just feel the curiosity I had felt before. I felt something far worse. Fear. It was like the prison itself was reaching out to me, trying to pull me in. The rules, the warnings, everything that had been set in place to protect me had been designed to keep something else in check. But whatever was in cell 13 had never been fully contained, and now it was awake. My hands were shaking as I reached for the intercom, desperate to speak to someone, anyone. But just as I pressed the button, the monitor went black. The lights in the booth flickered and died, plunging me into complete darkness. I was alone, or at least that's what I told myself. I couldn't be sure anymore. I stood up quickly, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The beam of light cut through the blackness, but it felt weak, like it couldn't fight off the darkness surrounding me. The scratching sound was getting louder, closer now. It wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from inside the booth. I spun around, but there was no one there. The scratching stopped. Everything stopped. Only the sound of my own ragged breathing echoing in the silence. And then I heard it. A voice, low and guttural, filled the room. You shouldn't have looked. It wasn't the voice of a prisoner. It wasn't even human. The sound felt like it was coming from the very walls, from the depths of the prison itself. I felt my knees go weak, but I forced myself to move, to stumble toward the exit. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. Suddenly, the door slammed shut in front of me. I whirled around, my heart pounding in my chest, but the door hadn't closed on its own. It had been slammed shut by someone on the other side. I couldn't breathe. I was trapped. The walls were closing in, and I could feel the thing that had been hunting me closing in as well. I backed up against the wall, staring at the door. The lights flickered back on, but they didn't help. The shadows were still there, lurking, waiting for me. And that's when I realized the truth. The prison wasn't just keeping the inmates inside. It was keeping something else in. And now, it was free.
I had made a terrible mistake. The moment the door slammed shut, I knew I was in over my head. There was no escaping this, not now. But I had to try. I had to survive. The darkness in the room seemed to grow thicker, pressing in on me, suffocating me with every breath. I could feel it, the weight of the prison itself, alive and pulsing with something ancient. The scratching had stopped, but now the silence was unbearable. It was too quiet, too still, like the whole place was waiting for me to make the next move. I turned toward the exit again. The door was still closed, and the thick steel frame seemed impenetrable. I had been trained to deal with emergencies, but nothing had prepared me for this. There was no plan, no procedure, just raw, terrifying instinct. My hand was trembling as I fumbled for the keys at my waist. There was a slim chance, just a slim one, that I could escape. The prison wasn't just a series of halls and cells. There were tunnels, hidden passageways beneath the surface, forgotten by time. I had read about them in the old files, but no one had ever spoken about them directly. They were reserved for emergencies. But what could be more of an emergency than this? I reached for the keys, but as my hand touched them, I felt a cold, ice-cold presence behind me. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't have to turn around to know it was there. I could feel it, its presence seeping into every corner of the room. The air turned colder, heavier. It was as though the very walls were closing in, but not from the outside, from within. The thing was inside me now. It had followed me here, and now it was circling like a predator, closing in on its prey. I spun around, my heart pounding wildly. Nothing. There was nothing there. But I could feel it. The darkness. It was alive, and it was feeding on my fear. I had to leave, now. I turned back to the door and grabbed the keys. My fingers shook as I shoved them into the lock, but they wouldn't fit. The keys rattled in the lock, refusing to turn. It was like the door had become part of the prison, fused with it, locked forever. I could feel the presence getting closer. It was in the walls, it was in the air, and it wanted me. I took a step back from the door, panic clawing at my throat. My mind raced. What now? The only way out was through the hidden tunnels, but I didn't know how to access them. I had no idea where they were. I had never been shown. The scratching returned. It was closer now, sharp and relentless. I whirled around again, trying to locate the source, but the room was still empty. The figure, the thing, was toying with me. I had broken the rules, and now it was coming for me. There was no escape. Unless I took a risk. I thought about the files I had read earlier, the tunnels, the hidden passages. They were located beneath the prison, somewhere in the depths. But there was a catch. The entrance to the tunnels was sealed off, and only a few high-ranking staff members knew how to get there. But desperation has a way of making you forget rules, making you willing to do anything to survive. I scanned the room, my eyes darting around, looking for something, anything that could give me an advantage. That's when I saw it. A ventilation shaft near the ceiling. It wasn't large, but it was big enough for me to crawl through. I could make it to the tunnels. I could find a way out. I moved quickly, my breath ragged. The scratching sound had intensified again. It was right behind me now. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel its icy breath on the back of my neck, the way it seemed to be watching me from every corner of the room. The walls were closing in again. I grabbed the chair and pushed it underneath the shaft. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped it. But I didn't have time to think. If I didn't get out of there now, I was going to die. I wasn't sure if the prison would let me live much longer. I climbed onto the chair, and with one last glance over my shoulder, I pulled myself into the shaft. My heart raced as I wriggled through the tight space, my knees scraping against the cold metal. I had to get to the tunnels. There was no other choice. The vent system was claustrophobic, the air stale and cold. My body pressed against the narrow walls as I crawled deeper into the shaft. I could hear my breath echoing in the confined space, and every creak and groan from the prison seemed to get louder. It felt like the entire building was waking up, ready to devour me. I didn't know how far I'd crawled, but the feeling of being watched never left me. It was like the prison was alive, its walls pressing in on me with each passing second. I had no idea how to find the tunnels, but there had to be something down here, something that would lead me out. Then, as I crawled further, the vent opened into a small, dark room. I had to be close. I could feel it. I looked around, my flashlight scanning the area, and then I saw it. A door, half hidden in the shadows. It was old, rusted, but it was a door nonetheless. I scrambled toward the door, pulling the heavy door open with a grunt. The hinges creaked loudly, and I winced, expecting the worst. But nothing happened. The air was still, deathly still. I stepped into the dark underground tunnel, the air thick with dust and mildew. The walls were damp, and the ground beneath my feet was uneven, but I didn't care. I was free. I had escaped. Or so I thought. I had made it out of the prison itself, but as I walked deeper into the tunnel, I felt something change. It wasn't the physical space that made me uneasy. It was the oppressive feeling of being watched that crept over me again. The walls seemed to pulse with something dark and cold. I didn't know where this tunnel led, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something much worse than what I had just escaped. And then I heard it, a low, guttural laugh echoing from the shadows. It wasn't over. Not yet.